I have always wanted to build a glider, and today in this video, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to be making this glider out of ash. Why that? Because it's relatively easy to work with, but yet pretty much as hard as oak, and it looks great. We have a couple other pieces in the room this is going to go that are ash, so that is what we wanted to go with. First off, breaking down the very long pieces on the miter saw. They're actually too wide for the miter saw, so I just do the flip action on the miter station and it breaks down no problem. There are a lot of pieces to break down, so I do keep track of them with letters on my cut sheet, and then I put those letters on the corresponding pieces of wood. Because we have 12-inch wide ash boards here, I gotta take the guard off of the jointer so that I can get that one portion, that 8-inch portion, flattened, and then I will put that up against the fence of the jointer. And then there's a board I use on the planer called a planer sled that goes underneath that flattened portion so you can clean up the parallel edge. I have a whole video on this process. I'll link to that down in the description below if you are interested in learning more about that. But realistically, using an 8-inch jointer, you can do something much wider if you need to. Once we got everything down to its final thickness, it was over to the table saw, on which I have the new Harvey Big Eye Rip Eye fence system, which is fantastic, very accurate, and it clamps on both sides of the table saw, so there is no movement at all. But over there on the Harvey table saw, we're going to be breaking down all the pieces to their proper widths. Once we got everything ripped to width on the table saw, guess what? It is back over to the miter station where we're going to get everything fine-tuned up to their final length. Some of the stuff had to be recut after it went through the planer or whatever, but this will be the final stop at the miter station. Now this is a glider, and there's lots of round ends and round areas and bearings that need to go in place, so I am simply marking those out and drilling a pilot hole so that we can go over to the bandsaw with the circle cutting jig, where we will cut the corners off of these pieces, leaving us with nice rounded edges. I do have a video of making this circle cutting jig, which has a huge range, down from small radii or diameters like this, which is a 2.5-inch diameter, all the way up to huge circles, like I think 3 feet or something like that. Once we're done on the bandsaw, it's over to the oscillating spindle sander, where we will clean up those fresh edges we just cut. Painstakingly cut on the bandsaw, sanded a lot to make one of the legs, and now we're going to trace this and use the router to copy the template. Now that we know what material we're going to be removing off this board, it is a quick pass over at the bandsaw to remove the bulk, and then we'll use double-sided tape to tape on the template that we did fine-tune up. This isn't a template, this is the other leg, but we're just making sure we get a template pattern match on the router. So now we have them taped together, and using a flush cut straight bit, we're going to run that over the router, and in the end, we're going to have two pieces that are identical matches. At this point, all of the straight pieces on this glider are done, so it is time to pivot over to prepare everything for the steam bending. What we need to do is get very thin pieces of the ash wood so that we can steam them and then laminate them together to get the curvature for the arms and the back that we want. Now we're going to be cutting very thin strips, so I turned the Big Eye Rip fence down to the low setting, which has this adjustable ruler, which is awesome, so you can get your push stick in there nice and safely. We're going to cut a bunch of pieces down for the arms, and we're going to cut pieces for the back of the glider that are all going to get bent. And all these pieces that we cut right here, we're going to be steam bending them, but we need to bend them to a form. So this rocker is being designed off of one we currently have in the house, and I went in with some template paper and traced out the back, and I also traced out the arm, which will be the two sections that we're going to be bending. I got the arm transferred onto some MDF right here. We're going to laminate 3 layers together. I'm going to cut and sand the one, and we'll router template just because it's easier to clean it up that way in my opinion. But I'm going to go ahead and center this one, so this is the back, on the boards here, and then just transfer it to the board with a marker tracing over the edge, and then we'll cut it on the bandsaw, sand it all up, and do the quick router template. Just a minute ago we did the same process for the base of the glider. Now we're going to be doing the same thing for the arms and the back. We're going to make one, which is going to turn into a template, one piece, that we're then going to laminate together and route on the router table using a straight cut template bit. Now that we got our templates ready, we can take those thin ash laminations and put them in the steam generator box, leave them in there for about 30 minutes, and then we're ready to steam bend. So in a quick snap, 30 minutes have passed, and we'll be taking those steamed pieces to the molds that we just made. And I did find that using these clamps that you can crawl from a large extension down to a small one are the best way to work with this steam stuff. There is an entire video on this, again, link down in the description below, because it is a tricky process. The steam bending of the arms worked out pretty well, and now we're going to take these three pieces and laminate them together. And we got to do this twice because we obviously have two arms to the side of this glider. So we're going to laminate them and actually set them in the mold again and use the clamps to make sure everything is formed up in the manner that we want it, because it has sprung back a little bit, not a ton, but when I released it from the mold, it sprung back a fraction. Really not a lot to this lamination, just make sure you got glue in there and everything is flush along the edges. And you do need lots of clamps, and it is best to work your way from one side, kind of bend everything onto the mold all the way around to the other one, because if you clamp the other side, you're basically going to get a pocket in there that you don't want. While all of that is setting up, let's go back to all our straight dimensional pieces and cut all of the bearing guides in there, using a marking gauge so that I have very, very accurate locations. And then we're going to be going over to the drill press where I have this stop in place so that this bearing will sit flush in the arms or the guides of this rocker. And this is important for the way the bearings connect later on, which we will show you. Bunch of holes on the drill press, a tool you don't use very much, but when you do use it, it's pretty awesome to have. There is that little bolt on the other end of the bearing that you got to drill in by hand. Just make sure you don't go through all the way and ruin all of your good work so far. All of our stuff is prepared, and now it is time to get ready to finalize it. So we're going to go to the double router. There's plans to this linked down in the description below, where we're going to put a very, very fine round over on all of our pieces in preparation for assembly. Now, there was some half laps that we cut on the table saw, but there's really nothing too exciting on that. Get yourself a dado stack, cut them real quick. Now, we do want to make sure that these vertical portions of the base are in the same spot. So I use a speed square set to the same spot and use it over and over again. For the sake of time, you don't see me drill pilot holes in the video, but you definitely want to drill pilot holes, even though you are using self-tapping or self-drilling screws, because at this point, you don't want to have a crack at the edge of your material and have to go back and remake. This is a very tricky assembly process on this glider because you need certain things in place to be able to make your final measurements and cut some of those dados. Like this board didn't have any dados cut in it because we needed to make sure we had the rockers in place. So once we were able to pull the measurement off of that, went back and cut them and carry on. And this is where you need to make sure you have that bearing set not too deeply, because there's a flange that holds it in place that you do want to make sure is snug. Adding all of the rocker glider to each assembly that goes on either side of the glider, making sure everything is snug but not too tight, because we got to take it apart again to put the finish on later. Making sure it's in place, and then drilling the screws through those last portions that we just cut the half flap dados on. And like I mentioned, now we get to take it apart because we need to add some spindles, and this is going to attach the glider mechanism to the chair, and then we obviously have spindles in the chair for the chair back and the sides as well. I didn't show making those dowels at all, although I did make every single one of them, and that took forever, but they turned out okay. Now that we got those holes drilled, each of them was at a slightly different angle, as you can see. I'm now finessing everything, looking at it, making sure we got our digital angle gauge in there, and then moving that angle to the table of the drill press, and we're pre-drilling those holes. The top holes here were particularly tricky because they had a compound angle. Not in two different directions, but we had to make sure the angle of the chair was a certain way, and then we had to take account the angle of the spindles, calculate that together to drill the hole. But in the end, it worked out fairly well. Although, if you look closely, you'll see some holes on the top there because I might have screwed it up the first time, but I would just flip the piece over and drill the holes in the new spot. Now, you can see here the arms and the back of the chairs, which are out of the bent lamination. and they are actually ready to mount onto the frame of the chair. So here you can see how I used a flattened disc to sand down the edge to finesse into the holes that we just drilled at our appropriate angle, and just did the same thing on both sides. And I did have to finesse all the spindles for the chairs just a wee bit to make sure everything fit. Alright, we are motoring right along. So here on the right hand side, you can see the arm of the chair is angled out slightly. So there's a compound angle there. And we want to make sure we do that to the left side. So two steps for this process. We're going to go over to the bandsaw and remove a bulk of it. And then over at the oscillating spindle sander, you won't see me add the angle, but this is where I add the angle in real time. So you can bend down the table of the spindle sander to be able to tip out the arms ever so slightly. Now that we got the arms in the back where we want them, you can see I cut down the arms. Didn't show that because it's just more bandsaw work and more sanding. Now it is time to put the back spindles in place. I'm using a level to make sure they're straight up and down and spacing them accordingly. I did have marks on the bottom for where I wanted to go and was using the level to make sure everything was where I wanted it to go. Then cut them down to their final lengths and we are ready for assembly. Alright, now that we got it, it's not quite together, as you can see. Nothing is glued up from the chair up, and the chair isn't glued down to the rocker mechanism, the gliding mechanism. So now that we got it together, got to take it all apart, got to route this, got to sand it. I did sand everything here and below. Need to resand this because I added a little piece right there to lift the whole thing a little bit. But yeah, now we get to take it all apart, sand it, spray it, get this together. We'll spray that in one piece. But anyway, kind of skipped over right here. Lots of finicking around, sanding, fine-tune adjustments. Not really something that I wanted to film or put in the video because it took a long time. But anyway, hope you guys got the gist of where we are up to this point. Now is not the time to mess up your project, so make sure you route and make sure you sand accordingly. And let me tell you guys something. There was so much sanding on this project, it was nauseating. But thankfully with the Surf Prep and Merca sanders, wasn't that long of a process. But lots and lots of it to do for sure. I am using liquid nails to put these spindles in because not every one of them was a perfect fit. So wood glue won't necessarily work because wood glue doesn't want to span a space. But liquid nails will work for that just fine. So I'm using liquid nails in some places, glue in others, depending on the joint. But all of the spindles were done with liquid nails. Now one step I didn't show here was at the bottom of everything, the spindles and the back of the chair, I cut a groove on the bandsaw. And the reason I did this is now we can put a wedge in there to make sure everything is super, super snug. Now that we got that chair all glued up and where we wanted, it's time to put the sides in. I already did one, as you can see there. Again, a combination of wood and liquid nails, depending on how the fit was. And then once I got it set into place, I drilled some holes and punctured a dowel with plenty of wood glue all the way through. Got one side on, two dowels under here into the frame that you can't see. I'll wait for that to all set up before I take this off and drill at least one dowel through there. This is the side that I messed up. I drilled the hole too big, so I plugged it. And this dowel right here is also a fraction short, so I used liquid nails in the bottom there to fill the void as well as adhere everything, unlike the wood glue that needs a tight fit. So chair is done, base is done, we are ready for finish. Got the fire going outside in the barn, and I do use waterborne finishes from General Finishes. We'll be doing sanding sealer and clear enduro polyurethane in a semi-gloss sheen, shot with all of the Fuji Spray Q5 system. And I'm going to do very light coats. So where I would typically do 2 sanding sealer or maybe 3 top coat, I'll probably do 2 sanding sealer and maybe like 5 top coats this time, because I want to do very thin coats so that I don't get any running down the vertical portions, because I usually like to spray flat surface so that I don't get any runs, but that's obviously not possible this time. Finish was a little bit tricky to apply, but in the end it went on with not much of an issue. And like I always say, spray finish or don't do it at all. There's no way I would want to do this by hand. But once we had given that plenty of time to set up and cure, it was time to assemble this thing yet again. Now, one thing we have never done yet is actually attach the top to the bottom. Clamped everything in place, make sure we had a full range of motion, and then it's simply 4 screws through the bottom into the base of the chair, as you can see right here. And then Sarah, my eldest daughter, she sewed up a base that's going to be set in place with some springs for a nice comfortable base for the cushions that we purchased off of Etsy. Again, link to the person we bought 2 pairs of these cushions from down in the description below. Now, these eyelets were pre-drilled, screwed into place quickly for these springs, and then there is an attachment in the back of the chair, which I don't actually show, going into place, but the end result is a nice, bouncy, but comfortable and firm base. I sure hope you guys enjoyed that video. There was a ton of footage, because this took me many weeks. I actually think it was on the workbench for a couple of months as I was completing this project. It did turn out absolutely beautiful. It is very comfortable. You'll notice we did change the cushions. The old rocker that was here that this was modeled after, I actually refinished that one, so it is now a dark finish that's up in the master bedroom where the furniture is dark. We ended up going with a different carpet than we originally had here, so we went with the blue cushions, which we got off of the same person that sewed the other ones off of Etsy. I sure hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was a good accomplishment. I will say that building this, I actually didn't like it so much. So it actually seemed to be more in the artistic side of woodworking, where the engineer in me likes the accuracy, predictability, repeatability of making like mass production kind of stuff. Now, it was fun. It will be a little while before I do something like this again, but again, this was kind of practice for working on the boat, in which we need to do a lot of steam bending stuff, the boat restoration on that. It was a fun project. It took a long time over the winter, but I do think it turned out great, and I sure hope you guys enjoyed the video and it didn't move through too quickly. If you did enjoy it, please have that thumbs up button, as it helps us out and gets this video in front of more eyes. I'm DIY Tyler. I'm going to enjoy my rocking chair now, and you guys have a good one.